Robert Needs Money is definitely a really thought-provoking episode of Everybody Loves Raymond. For the most part, I am on Ray's side, but Robert does make an interesting argument. This is the 6th episode of Season 7 of Everybody Loves Raymond. It's directed by Michael Zinberg, and as always, there will be spoilers from now as I go through the episode chronologically and share some thoughts. It starts off with Robert going over to Debra and Ray's house, and they reluctantly, mostly reluctance on Ray's part, invite him along with him to the movies, but Robert doesn't want to go. He just wants to sit there and watch their television because he had to cancel cable. They're doing cutbacks at work. It's a difficult time for him financially. And Debra says to Ray that they should give him some money. And Ray doesn't want to, and then there was a weird cut to the next scene. It's basically a couple of minutes later, and Ray kind of sighs, and then there's this really bizarre cut where I feel like it should have cut just before the sigh, or it felt like there was something missing. It's a minor detail, but I just found it to be a bit strange. But that being said, things do get chopped up a bit. I know Friends is a big one, the version of Friends on Netflix, although Friends does leave Netflix in like 3 weeks' time. There are scenes missing, so it is possible it's been cut up for the DVD version. We then cut, as I said, to basically a tiny bit later, and Debra is writing a check for Robert, and she takes it to Robert, and I love the delivery of the next few lines, because she says to him, "We want to lend you some money. It's not a big deal. We don't have to talk about it." I love that. Just those words there. Not even giving Robert a chance to initially say no or to have any kind of response, because I feel like most people in that scenario would feel uncomfortable accepting money from somebody, even a family member. But Debra very clearly made it clear that it's not a big deal. We don't have to discuss it. This is something we want to do. Let's not make a big thing out of it. And I think that her approach was really, really great. And they do ultimately convince Robert to take it. And it's genuinely one of the most beautiful scenes, because he's a little overwhelmed that they would do this for him, and he insists on giving Ray a hug. And I was waiting for the punchline. I was waiting for a joke, because pretty much every scene with Raymond ends either dramatically or with a joke. And it didn't. But that's not a criticism. It was just so unexpected that it was just a genuine display of love and appreciation. And we got to enjoy that without them then delivering a joke or having something chaotic happen, and it was just a really, really beautiful moment. However, things do get chaotic very quickly. Ray and Debra go over to Marie and Frank's, and Marie finds out that they gave Robert the money, and Debra says that she wants to buy out the loan, but Debra explains that actually it ended up being a gift. And then Robert comes over. He's very happy. One might think he's happy because his immediate financial troubles are over, but it's a little deeper than that. He's excited because he's going on vacation. He is going to Vegas. And Ray's response was my response. How dare you? How dare you, even if it was a gift, take money from somebody else when you're struggling and spend that money on a vacation? That's not your priority. But as I said, Robert did make some good points. He explained that the problem with money is still going to be there. Yes, that $1,000 will be a big help, but once that money's gone, the problems will still be there. And I'm not saying that I therefore think it's fine that he blew the entire, I assume it was the whole amount, on the entire money going to Vegas. I don't agree with that, but it is a valid point. It's just a temporary solution to what is presumably going to be a long-term problem. So why can't he enjoy the money? Again, I don't agree with it, but I actually can see Robert's point there. And he does refer to it as an extra $1,000, when I would refer to it as his only $1,000. So definitely different headspaces, different perspectives. We have a really great moment as well. While Ray is getting annoyed at Robert and talking with him, Debra is behind him and says, "Can I just say something?" And Ray says to her, "No, the last thing you said cost me $1,000, which is very true. And I love the fact that Debra didn't argue it. She didn't fight against what Ray had said, because I think she realised, yeah, maybe it wasn't the best idea if this is what was going to happen. And it's unusual for Debra to just back down. It's also unusual for Ray to stand up for himself. I feel like we've seen it a little bit more in this season, actually. I feel like seasons 1, 2, 3, maybe a little bit later, It never really happened, at least as far as I can remember. So it's nice to see Ray, I guess, putting his foot down, because his instinct to not do this was correct. I'm not saying Debra shouldn't have given him the money, but at the same time, maybe she should have listened to Ray. Maybe they should have helped him out in other ways. And Ray says to Robert, and this is really brutal, "You take the money and you go to Vegas with it, you're not my brother." That is so dramatic, making up for the fact that we didn't have any drama in the very sweet scene where Ray hugged Robert, or the other way on, Robert hugged Ray. So it's definitely an intense moment. And then Ray ultimately visits Robert in his apartment, and I don't know if I agree with what happens next, immediately next, because Ray says to Robert, "I might have said some things back there that I probably shouldn't have said." Sure, he probably shouldn't have said, "You're not my brother," if you do that with the money. But nothing was getting through to Robert. He wasn't understanding what he was doing was wrong. He wasn't realizing that they felt like basically they'd been robbed of their money because it was supposed to help him live and pay bills and buy decent food, and he wasn't doing any of that. So yes, it's a gift. He can technically do what he wants with it, but a gift can have an intention behind it. And I don't think Robert understands that. I don't think Ray should have apologized. Maybe he should have said, "I shouldn't have said you're not my brother," but he should have had the caveat that this wasn't acceptable still. A little bit more forceful. And Robert ends up calling Ray, and I quote, "a heartless dictator or mom." Which is harsh. Ray doesn't want to be called a heartless dictator or be compared to Marie. And again, a slightly valid point when Robert says he shouldn't be telling him how to live his life. And technically it is now his money. Even if it was a loan, it's still his money. He would have to pay it back, but it's still, at that moment, for him to spend it as necessary. So there are a lot of different opinions and perspectives here, and I do think there are some good arguments. But then Robert said something quite eye-opening. He yells at Ray, he does yell this out, that he needs to go to Vegas because he's not lucky and he needs a break from his life. And this happens just after it's revealed that he kind of feels like Ray doesn't deserve the money, which I think is unfair. That's a horrible thing to say. Ray does work hard. He's obviously very good at what he does. He's one of the lucky people in life who gets to earn a living doing something about which he is very passionate. One could argue that Robert's also passionate about what he does, but maybe doesn't bring in quite as big a paycheck. And it was not fair of Robert to say that he didn't think Ray deserved it, but I think it is very telling about Robert's jealousy. And it's not the first time we've seen this, of course, but I do think it's very important. And then actually quite quickly they make up. I also want to point out as well that when Robert yelled that he needs to go to Vegas because he's not lucky, like Raymond, my first thought was, if you're not lucky, you probably shouldn't go to Vegas. I feel like Vegas relies on good luck, a lot of it, and skill, of course. There's a lot of skill involved in a lot of the card games and things, but certainly with slot machines, you need luck, and that's about it. I don't know if there is any skill involved. I don't know if every machine spits out so much money after so many plays. I have no idea. But needless to say, if you don't feel lucky, Vegas probably isn't the best option. And then quite quickly they make up. And it was a bit weird. It did feel a little rushed, making up after quite a huge argument and a lot of hurtful things being said. But then they decide that the best thing to do is for Ray to go to Vegas as well. He just needs another $1,000 and off he goes. And he decides that he's going to obviously have to bring this up with Debra. So in the final scene, he comes back into the house and he tells Debra it didn't go very well with Robert. Maybe I need to spend more time with him. Maybe I should go to Vegas with him. And I think it was very, very clear that Debra was not actually agreeing with this. She seemed to pretend to for a couple of seconds. And she says to Ray, "Oh, I think you should go. And when you get there, see what the odds are of me being here when you get back." She saw right through him, and I rather enjoyed it. And I think we can assume that Ray didn't get to go to Vegas with Robert. That being said, what's the problem? Debra already said to Ray, it was her argument, we're doing well financially. That was her argument when she wanted to give Robert the money. So why can't Ray go and have some bonding time with his brother? I think it was maybe, not for the first time, a harsh, unrealistic reaction from Debra. But because Ray was kind of trying to trick Debra into letting him go, I also don't disagree with her actions. Had Ray just said to her, look, I think this would be really good for me, I can go away and spend some time with him, and hey, maybe when I'm back, you can go and do something and I'll look after the kids. He could have got this if he'd played it right. Message there, don't try and trick somebody because it's probably not going to work out. Ultimately, it is a very, very thought-provoking episode. There are some funny moments, there are some very sweet, heartfelt moments. There are a lot of good arguments, and ultimately, again, I don't agree with Robert. If somebody lends you money when you're in a tight spot, it is not for you to spend that money on things that are not necessities, because the gift was given with an intention. And that intention is to save you rather than giving you a chance to go off and have some fun. That's a luxury, not a necessity. Although one could argue it's for Robert's mental health. Maybe it is a necessity. But again, there are arguments for both sides, and I can absolutely see Robert's perspective. But if I were Ray and Debra, and I had given somebody money to help them with their bills, if they said, I can't pay my bills, I've had to shut off the cable, well, here's some money to pay for cable. And then they go and book a flight somewhere, I'd be very annoyed. So, yeah, definitely very thought-provoking, a really interesting episode. Some great scenes with Robert and Ray, some brilliant dialogue and performances, and ultimately, it's a solid episode of Everybody Loves Raymond.